You're trying to tell me a magazine only lasted for 4 issues and issue 2 covered Lego Bionicle Quest for the Toa? Because I'd believe you. This is a bit of an oddity. It is Nintendo Power Advance. Nintendo Power's had a few little spin-offs here and there. Here's one of them called Pocket Power. This was given out during The Wizard in theaters. So, you know, when you were watching The Wizard in theaters, you could thumb through Pocket Power for all the tips on random-ass games, you know? Oh man, I'm watching them play Super Mario Bros. 3 on the big screen. Well, here's some tips on Jeopardy Jr. But they also had Pokemon Power. You know, like they would do kind of specialized versions of Nintendo Power for bigger things going on at the time. But this is probably one of their most in-depth things they've done. A whole ass new line of Nintendo Power magazines entirely dedicated to the Game Boy Advance. And it all started with this premiere issue right here. I'm covering up the address of John, but as you can see here, what they did was that they actually gave these out for free. To show our appreciation for your continued support, we would like you to have this complimentary copy of Nintendo Power Advance. We hope you enjoy our new quarterly look at the most popular Game Boy Advance titles. So yeah, this is the first time I'm actually taking a look inside this. I'm actually very interested to see like what this is all about, because Nintendo Power back in the 90s was far more focused on tips and tricks and strategy guides and maps and all of that, whereas Nintendo Power moving into the 2000s was far more concerned with reviews, news, all of that kind of stuff. And that kind of stuff interests me a whole lot more, even in retrospect. I love taking a look back at like a 2003 issue of Nintendo Power to see what was new at the time. Whereas Nintendo Power in the 90s, I felt more like, here's a strategy guide for Felix the Cat on NES. Do with this what you will. So I'm interested to see what Nintendo Power Advance feels like in comparison. We first up have this ad for the Game Boy Advance. The future of gaming is in your hands. Fun to the second power. A bigger, brighter future with its advanced 32-bit processor, 50% larger, brighter, and sharper LCD screen, and the dozens of new game titles slated to be released soon. Game Boy Advance promises to be a real handful. And right now, we've got an offer that's hard to beat too. 18 action-packed issues of Nintendo Power for only $29.95. Volumes 2, 3, and 4 of the all-new Nintendo Power Advance free. So it almost seems like, yeah, obviously, this was going to be a limited run magazine. I believe they only did 4 issues of this, and they probably planned that out from the beginning. The fact that on the front of this cover, they said it's a quarterly magazine, so I feel like throughout 2001, they just kind of put this out every quarter. Next up, we have an ad for Lady Sia. I've never even heard of this game. And then we have the table of contents here. Welcome, as the launch of Game Boy Advance opens a new chapter in the history of the world's most successful line of portable game systems, the Nintendo Power staff is geared up to bring you the world's best game strategies for GBA. Yes, the best game strategies for Super Mario Bros. 2 on the NES. Yeah, so we have a full-ass diagram and explanation of the Game Boy Advance. Here we have some screenshots of stuff they have planned, specifically Wario Land. They weren't even calling it Wario Land 4 at the time. They're just calling it Wario Land for Game Boy Advance. Talking about the complex colors, a wide world with the widescreen, adventures in 3D, how it can do 3D. And here we have their coverage on Super Mario Advance, which it seems like this is just a full-blown strategy guide for Mario Advance, which is pretty cool that you get pretty much like, this is just it. This is the strategy guide, and you got it for free in this magazine, on top of various others. That is pretty cool. Mario Advance as a Game Boy Advance launch title is a bit peculiar. It's definitely a bit of an interesting choice to go with Super Mario Bros. 2 as the start of the Game Boy Advance heritage of Mario games. But I think it all made sense in the end. You know, you had Mario 1 on the Game Boy Color via Super Mario Bros. Deluxe, which I think that's pretty much the start of the Super Mario Advance line right there. And then they probably wanted to move on to a Super Nintendo game to just kind of show like, hey, you know, the Game Boy Advance can do Super Nintendo games. So then they moved on to Mario World. And then after that, they were like, well, you know, Yoshi's Island, why not? All right, I'm trying to make sense of it. It doesn't really make sense. Here we have some strategies on the Mario Brothers arcade game included in Super Mario Advance. And then we have Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2, which the Game Boy Advance version of this is pretty wild. This is really damn good on Game Boy Advance. But they also talk about the Nintendo 64 version here. But it's weird because they put this ad for the game. Like, this is just an ad. This isn't the start of the strategy guides. Before F-Zero Maximum Velocity, when later in the magazine, boom, here's more on Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2. You're welcome. Here's F-Zero Maximum Velocity. Back when F-Zero was still being considered like the tentpole showcase for a system's technology. Maximum Velocity is kind of like a bit of a sequel to F-Zero on SNES, which is pretty crazy to think like how much of the F-Zero series kind of looks like this. Like, not as much in comparison as like fully 3D. You got F-Zero X and F-Zero GX, and that's basically it. The rest of the series is the SNES game and then the GBA games, of which there were 3 of them. And if you want to go even wilder, you have like F-Zero Grand Prix 2 on the Satellaview. It's just like most of the F-Zero franchise looks like this. It's pretty wild. But this was definitely a solid showcase for the Game Boy Advance hardware. It showed how well you can do racing games on this handheld. Of course, nowadays when you go back to racing games on the Game Boy Advance, it's really nothing special. In fact, I'd say it's pretty lame. But back then, it was a significant leap forward racing games on the Game Boy Color, really any other game system at the time. I have an ad for Castlevania Circle of the Moon, an excellent Castlevania game, the first on Game Boy Advance. Then we have Rayman Advance, which is pretty much just a full-blown remake of the original Rayman. Funny because, you know, they combine different elements, you know, like this is the original Rayman 1 box art. Then we have, you know, like Rayman from Rayman 2. Remember when Ubisoft would put Rayman on damn near everything? To be fair, they kind of do that with like Rayman Legends. That gets like a port to pretty much every system. It's playable on like every modern system. But it doesn't feel like they're trying to put Rayman on everything anymore. At least Rayman 2. Rayman 2 was ported damn near everywhere back in the day. But the original Rayman also got ported to various platforms. You know, we had the GBA version here. We also had a DSiWare. It was on DSiWare, which was pretty cool. Iridion 3D. I don't know. But it's done by Shinin, which is pretty cool. I didn't know they were doing stuff all the way back then. Shinin does the Fast Racing series. You know, might know them from like Fast Racing Neo on the Wii U, Fast RMX on Nintendo Switch. Very cool. I mean, I probably knew that they were around before that, but like didn't really remember it until right now. Here we go on to Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2, which this series was like pretty much every single year. And the fact, like, it was on literally like every platform possible. Like Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4 still released on the PS1, which is pretty nuts. But yeah, this also came out on Game Boy Advance. I believe Game Boy Color as well. Fortress, the twerps have landed. Huh. And we have Castlevania Circle of the Moon. This game definitely does benefit from having all these maps laid out here, which is pretty damn cool that you get all of this as kind of a complimentary feature of being a Nintendo Power issue subscriber. I have an ad for the Earthworm Jim GBA port here. And we move on to a buyer's guide. Very cool. So we start off with Earthworm Jim, and then Super Dodgeball Advance, Pino B, Wings of Adventure, which just doesn't really seem like a buyer's guide. It's just kind of talking about all the other games available. GT Advanced Championship Racing, Bomberman Tournament, Ready to Rumble Boxing Round 2, Tweety and the Magic Gems. Here's another ad for Pino B. I think I'm gonna say something a little crazy here. Nintendo Power Advance is just a way to market the Game Boy Advance. Oh my god, a Game Boy Advance? I can buy that at Toys R Us. Oh my god. A Pitfall the Mine Adventure? Damn, so badass. I bet the game is gonna make me feel like that. It's like I own a pickaxe in real life. Konami Crazy Racers, that's an interesting one. It's kind of like an evolution of Konami's Dream Mix TV World Fighters on the GameCube, where like you're playing as all these different random-ass Konami characters fighting against each other. You can play as Solid Snake, Simon Belmont, Bomberman, and then Konami Crazy Racers is a bit similar. You know, you can play as Ninja from Metal Gear, Dracula from Castlevania, Goemon. Oh my god, and then Advance Peaks. What's coming up for Game Boy Advance? Let's see, Advance Wars. That's pretty cool. The fact that, you know, they were hyping up Advance Wars, especially when that series was, you know, like not available in North America forever, till it finally came to the Game Boy Advance, and then the name Advance Wars just stuck. Even though ever since back in Japan, it would always get renamed to whatever system it was on. Famicom Wars, Super Famicom Wars, and then Game Boy. It was also Game Boy Wars on Game Boy. And Advance Wars, it's just called Advance Wars. Wario Land for GBA, Diddy Kong Pilot. That's pretty cool. Of course, that game was retooled to be Banjo Pilot when Rare was bought out by Microsoft. And then we have just a full-blown upcoming Game Boy Advance titles. We have DK Coconut Crackers, that became It's Mr. Pants. Golden Sun, Jimmy Neutron, that's either the game based on the movie or Jimmy Neutron versus Jimmy Negatron. M&M's Lost in Time. Who gives a shit if Candy time travels? They just kind of name off random IPs of like cartoons, right? Rocket Power, Rugrats, SpongeBob, and then we have Super Mario Brothers 3, Super Mario World, Yoshi's Island, and Yoshi's Story. That's pretty interesting. So the thing with that was at like events, Nintendo was showing off like a tech demo of Yoshi's Story, like basically like trying to show like a game that looked like Yoshi's Story graphically from the Nintendo 64 running on the Game Boy Advance. But I never knew that was actually planned to be an actual game. I think it was always meant to be just a tech demo. But you know, hey, the Nintendo Power staff might have looked at it like, oh, that's definitely a game coming out. But who knows? Maybe it was actually like, yeah, we're planning Yoshi's Story for the Game Boy Advance. But it's also pretty interesting that they were still planning, like, yep, Mario 3, Mario World, and Yoshi's Island. They were planning all these games from the very start. It took a while for them all to come out. I think Mario 3 was like a 2003 game. But yeah, it's pretty crazy that they had them all planned out. They were like, yep, Mario 3 is coming. But yeah, that was the premiere issue of Nintendo Power Advance. Now, before we get into the other ones, I don't have every single one. I know I'm faking it for you. But we do have issues 2 and 3, so why not? Here we are with issue 2, focusing primarily on Mario Kart Super Circuit, one of my favorite GBA games based solely on nostalgia alone, because goddamn, who gives a damn about this game anymore? I mean, you gotta look at it from the perspective of the time, man. I mean, like, Mario Kart was a home console only series, so to have like a pretty in-depth, like fully featured Mario Kart on the go, like, that was unheard of. And it was like the most content-rich Mario Kart at the time. Now, when you look at the content that it was rich in, that isn't saying much at all. Like, yeah, it had the same character roster as Mario Kart 64, and it had not only 20 brand new tracks, but the 20 tracks from Super Mario Kart, which was like, wow, this game had the most Mario Kart tracks of any Mario Kart game until Mario Kart 8. But then you look at the tracks that it had, and it's just like, well, who the hell cares? But it's still pretty damn cool, so I definitely would love to see what they have to say about this game in this issue. And right here, we get a full-blown ad for the game. High octane, straight from the source. Man, look at this art, man. Look at these damn trees. This is like in that strange era for Mario where they were still using like those N64 era renders, which have their own a very specific look to them. And then as we graduated over to the GameCube, you know, with a game like Luigi's Mansion, I feel like with that game, you still had kind of N64 era Luigi in the game, not in terms of like the quality of his model, but just the art style they chose. And you had a similar art style with the Mario characters in Super Smash Bros. Melee. But then when we move over to like Mario Party 4 and Mario Sunshine, that's when you get the more modern looking Mario designs. But this is pretty much just telling us to subscribe to Nintendo Power. 12 action-packed issues of Nintendo Power for only 20 bucks. Oh, damn. That's a pretty good deal. You save over 66%, plus your choice of these amazing bonus gifts. All right, Mario Kart Super Circuit t-shirt, adult size L, that's all they had. Nintendo Power Advance headphones, and Pokemon Crystal version player's guide. Oh, man, that is tricky. I do feel like all those prizes have pretty much the same value to me these days. I mean, Nintendo Power Advance headphones is pretty damn sweet, especially because it's Nintendo Power Advance. I mean, how much merchandise do you have for Nintendo Power Advance specifically? But they're also headphones from 2001, so like, I don't really care. And you know they ain't gonna be designed very well. They're just gonna be like basic black headphones with the Nintendo Power Advance logo on on the ear cups. Who the hell cares? And a Mario Kart Super Circuit t-shirt, that's pretty cool, but once again, it's probably just gonna be a white-ass t-shirt with, like, this. So I'd say the Pokemon Crystal version player's guide has the most value, honestly. Here we have an ad for Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2, which was also in the last issue. And here we have the guide to Mario Kart Super Circuit. We get to see all the stats for all the characters here. I would definitely mess around with everybody back in this game, but I believe Yoshi and Mario, and maybe Luigi as well, were kind of my go-tos. And we have all the items in the game. I don't believe Super Circuit had any brand new ones. I think these were all pretty much just ripped directly from Mario Kart 64. But the feather isn't here. Oh no, not the feather! Does anybody remember, like, retro gaming discourse from back in, like, 2007, 2008 or something, where it's just like, people were acting like Super Mario Kart was top shit, you know? And it's like, damn, they got rid of the feather and Super Circuit has no feather. And the people that complained about that back then, these days, are just wallowing in their own mud. I love this retro stuff, man. I love looking back at it, but yeah, at some point, you gotta move on. It's fun to look at this stuff, but to act like this was the only thing that fucking mattered? Cheeseland? I find the maps here to be pretty cool. The fact that they outline how many coins are scattered amongst the track, where all the item boxes are and whatnot. This is all pretty cool, man. And then we have Balloon Battle Mode, which was definitely probably one of the least visited portions of Super Circuit. Just because, you know, for multiplayer, you gotta have, you know, the whole setup for a Game Boy Advance game, which is a lot, but hey, back then, if you had people with the game, with the link cables, all that stuff, it's pretty cool. Here we have the Advance Wars guide here. First time Advance Wars ever hit the States, and when I say Advance Wars, I mean like Famicom Wars, I guess. And yeah, I never got fully into Advance Wars, but I always appreciated the style. I always really enjoyed it, and I played a bit of this game and also 2 on the Game Boy Advance, as well as the Nintendo Switch remake of both 1 and 2. But I still have to put more time into it. It is something where if I actually have time, and I will like sit down and be like, all right, I'm dedicating it to this strategy game, I'm going to enjoy it. I do like strategy games, but like all the strategy games out there take way too goddamn long to get into. And there's so many tutorials and so many cutscenes. Fire Emblem Engage is a great game. The story sucks ass. And that would be fine if the story wasn't like consistent. It's just always there. Boom, 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 boom. But then when I got into the actual gameplay, I'm like, well, hot damn, this is actually pretty good. And I know I feel the same about Advance Wars, even though like it's not the same in terms of the story. It's more so just if I commit time to it, I know I'm gonna like it a lot. But I think over like a nice little staycation or something, I'll definitely hop back into 1+2 Reboot Camp, because I think it definitely deserves it. I love the style of the remake. The style of the original ain't anything to sneeze at. I mean, this all looks phenomenal. Here we have Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo Revival, like a genuine like shock and awe of that being on the Game Boy Advance. I do have this game, but I am kind of interested on how the controls work with just A, B, L, R. I mean, you do have start and select, so let me see if I can at least see anything about that, because Street Fighter does require more buttons, but you know, you never know. Just looking at the guide here, I'm not necessarily sure just kind of at a glance what the compromises were in the controls department. But I do know is, you know, hey, Street Fighter 2 on the Game Boy Advance this early on in its life, that's pretty wild. And obviously it would technically work, considering, you know, Street Fighter 2 was in the 16-bit era and the Game Boy Advance was notoriously kind of a Super Nintendo to go. But do you ever look back at stuff like this and realize, like, what was Nintendo doing, man? Like for something like the Game Boy Advance, you make it as powerful as a Super Nintendo, yet you remove 2 of the buttons. So then you only have 2. It's just like it feels like you're pretty much setting yourself up to have compromised versions of these games. And the same for like the DS. You make this handheld capable of 3D graphics, you put Mario 64 on it as a launch title, and yet it doesn't have any form of an analog stick. And then you have the 3DS, no second circle pad. And these things all worked out in the end, it's fine. But it always kind of felt like Nintendo's had to slightly struggle with the fact that they didn't have as many inputs as the games that were coming to these systems, even from themselves, kind of required in the case of like Mario 64 and all the Super Nintendo games available on the Game Boy Advance. Like they always remove that one thing they might actually need. Oh, here we have an ad for Klonoa, the Game Boy Advance game, Empire of Dreams. I haven't played the Klonoa games outside of 1 and 2 and the Wii remake and the remakes of 1 and 2 on modern platforms. But yeah, Klonoa is a lovely series. I don't think it's like a must play for everybody, like, oh my god. But it's genuinely very lovely. They're lovely games. Now, if you expect me to have anything like that to say about Jurassic Park 3 Park Builder, lovely game. It's just a lovely game. I know nothing about this game in particular here. I know Jurassic Park has a pretty long legacy of park building sims, which does make sense. You have the original Xbox game. I forget the name of it right now, but I do know it's one of the harder to find original Xbox games. But then you have like some more modern ones based on like Jurassic World, so I do know those are out there. God damn, it seems like Nintendo Power Advance just has the same ads for the same games across all issues. Here we have Lego Bionicle Quest for the Toa. Does Scott care? You decide. Now they're just kind of repeating stuff from the first issue. Here's a tip on Mario Advance. If I have issue 2 of Nintendo Power Advance, I probably have issue 1. Here I have a buyer's guide. Mega Man Battle Network. I didn't realize that was so early on in the system's life, October 2001. Yeah, Battle Network is definitely like a you had to be there kind of thing. Like I'm never gonna get into the original Battle Network games, but like I said, you had to be there. Original Namco Museum, definitely a game that I would have preferred having back in the day, mainly because I had Pac-Man Museum, which was just a bunch of damn Pac-Man games. Namco Museum, you had a Pac-Man game, Miss Pac-Man, and then a bunch of the other Namco games that I like Galaga and Dig Dug. I'm like, well, that's just a better deal. We have a blurb on the Klonoa game we saw the ad for. I wish they included this in Fantasy Reverie series. Where it's not just 1 and 2. I mean, you had the Game Boy Advance games. How hard is Game Boy Advance to emulate? You know, just throw it on there. I would have loved that. Final Fight 1. Yeah, I believe that's just literally like the original Final Fight from the arcades on Game Boy Advance. Which I played through that on the Capcom Beat 'em Up bundle, and it's a solid beat 'em up. It's hard for me to really give a damn about most beat 'em ups. They're fun in the moment, you know, like you just want to turn off your brain and just plow through them, especially when they're on like collections when you can just keep inserting coins and it doesn't matter. But yeah, I mean, Final Fight's fine. You know, I think I definitely prefer something like a Streets of Rage 4, but to be fair, that has like 20 years on it. So of course it's going to be a lot better, but I just love the style. I love the feeling. Final Fight has not had like a new game since like Streetwise on the PS2 and Xbox, and like most elements from like Final Fight have just kind of lived on within like Street Fighter. So you know, hey, it's a legacy franchise, but it's not much more than that at this point. Oh god damn. Well, this is an early 2000s ad. I mean, come on. I don't remember seeing this ever. However, I've definitely seen ads just like this in like my Nickelodeon magazines and the sort. There's a certain like vibe where like all these ads have nothing to do with each other, but like they just like look at this original like Donkey Kong Country Game Boy Advance ad. Like, look at that. It just gives off that vibe, you know? Hey, speaking of Pac-Man Collection here, we do have Pac-Man Collection. I owned that as a kid. Lego Island 2, The Brickster's Revenge. You know, the Lego Island games, I believe, were, you know, PC titles. I never had them, personally, but I do know those were like, hey, if you grew up in the late 90s, early 2000s, like, oh man, Lego Island, motherfucker. Oh my god. So they have 3 games, an ad for 3 games based on Jurassic Park 3. The DNA Factor, Park Builder, and, like, I don't know. I don't know what this one is called. It doesn't even really say. Jurassic Park, destroy traps and barricades and run from dinosaurs. to escape from Jurassic Park Island. I don't know what this one is called. Is this one just Jurassic Park 3? I don't know, I guess it's kind of similar. There was like a ton of Jurassic Park games back in the 90s, where like you have Jurassic Park on Genesis, but then you have Jurassic Park Rampage Edition, which you'd think would be like just like an updated version of the game. No, it's completely different. You play as a fucking dinosaur in that one. We have Jimmy Neutron, a boy genius, based on the movie there. I had the sequel to that game, Jimmy Neutron versus Jimmy Negatron. And unlike that game, I did not have Konami Crazy Racers, which I do wish I would have had. Introducing the first kart racing game on Game Boy Advance. Yeah, was this like a launch title? I completely forget. Did this beat Mario Kart to the system? I assume it did, because like they're really touting it. In Comic Sans, no less. And then we have a very similar upcoming Game Boy Advance titles section here. Pretty much the exact same setup there. They have Sonic the Hedgehog, which, you know, I assume that's Sonic Advance. And then we have some screenshots of some upcoming games. All advertised with like a Paper Mario artwork here, which is strange. I assume it's just kind of like, oh, well, it's just like there wasn't as much of a distinct difference between like, no, that is Paper Mario, and this is just regular Mario. I think many times Nintendo or whatever, a lot of outlets would just use Paper Mario as just like, oh, let's talk about Mario, and it's a picture of Paper Mario. But we have Doom, Prehistoric Man, which is a Super Nintendo game. I didn't realize that had a Game Boy Advance version. Frogger's Adventures, I had that one as a kid. Did not get far in it, but it is a quality Frogger game. I believe the sequel on Game Boy Advance is a bit better. I only really played this one, but I watched Nitro Rad's Frogger retrospective series where he went through all the original Frogger games from this generation, and an entire video was just dedicated to the Frogger GBA games. And yeah, they're just throwing a bunch of bullshit at the wall, man. But the Game Boy Advance games, for the most part, pretty rock solid. And Temple of the Frog is you know, simple. It's the first one, but it's not bad. It does the job. And then we have Doom on the Game Boy Advance, which is a pretty good version of Doom, all things considered. But alas, this is our last issue of Nintendo Power Advance that I have access to right now. If I find the other issue or issues, then I'll definitely pick them up. But yeah, this is all I really have, which is fine by me. I think this is a really cool sub-series to have, but at the end of the day, it's just a bunch of guides to Game Boy Advance games out at the time. And because all these issues came out so close to each other, they all cover a lot of the same stuff. So, you know, hey, these are really cool to look through, but I'm not begging. I'm not begging, pleading for more. Yeah, well, that's the same goddamn ad. Oh! So here are the pictures of the object. So I was pretty much right on the money with the Mario Kart Super Circuit t-shirt, but I expected this to be much smaller and like up here or something. That isn't too bad, but it's still, you know, just a white ass t-shirt with this on it. Pretty much right on the money with the Nintendo Power Advance headphones. Then, you know, the player's guide is different because I guess they change from time to time. This issue definitely came out later in the year, like November or something, considering that we have a Luigi's Mansion player's guide ready to go here. And then we have another Spyro's Season of Ice ad, this time with Impact Font saying this. It's like some f***ing like iFunny meme. And then we have a big ass guide on Golden Sun coming out in November of 2001. This was kind of the GBA's big RPG to call its own. And yeah, I'd love to see Golden Sun come back eventually. I played a bit of this one on the Wii U Virtual Console, and it is pretty damn good. It's pretty solid for what it is. But it's another one of those games where I think, like, if you actually remade it, I think it would be a lot easier to see just how special the game is. I'd love to see if they could do like that and 2 maybe combine together into one combo pack. That'd be pretty sweet. Tekken Advance, that's a little silly. And then we have Wario Land 4. The last Wario Land game made in-house by Nintendo. God damn, a lot of these promotional art looks like much older Nintendo promotional art. like for like Wario Land 2 or something, you know? But yeah, the Wario Land series is strange because this was pretty much like Nintendo's 2D platformer series for a while there. Mario, they weren't doing anything with Mario at the time. I think they just assumed since like, hey, Mario has transitioned to 3D, those are the main Mario games now. And on the Game Boy Advance, I think they just saw more value in remaking the Mario games, like, you know, with the Mario Advance series. So I guess Wario kind of took over for original 2D platformers, which is very strange looking back. I mean, like, this was an internally developed Nintendo series. And then they tried again with Wario Land Shake It on the Wii by Goodfeel, which is great game. But once again, would love to see Wario Land come back. And NBA Jam 2002? I didn't realize how much NBA Jam they tried to make that continue to work for years past like the arcade 16-bit era. So much so that this is literally NBA Jam 2002. There's a damn year on the title. That is pretty wild. We have Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone on GBA. Is this like the RPG? I'm not sure. I don't think this is the RPG. I believe on Game Boy Color, the Harry Potter games were actually RPGs, which is pretty interesting. This one, I think it looks like it's a top-down adventure game. Yeah, but I think this was probably before the first movie came out, so you know, they were definitely prepping for some major stuff with this game. However, this is pretty interesting considering there was that whole thing that Nintendo would try to initially buy the Harry Potter license, which would have been wild because like instead of the movies getting made and instead of video games being based on the movies, like the adaptations of those books would have been video games for Nintendo's platforms. It's weird. All of 3DO's games, who gives a f***? This is something I'm actually not sure of, like 3DO, like the 3DO, like Panasonic 3DO? Because I know they've published a fair amount of games, mostly games that are like pretty like low budget kind of stuff. I mean, they have the Army Men games, but you know, I don't consider those to be really big top tier games. But instead of that, you see a lot of like Johnny Mosley Matrix, Cubix, you know, it's just a lot of icks, you know. Breath of Fire by Capcom. Super Nintendo remake here. Like I said, you know, Game Boy Advance was big on the SNES remakes. And according to the upcoming releases section, they would have potentially tried an N64 remake with Yoshi's Story. But yeah, I've always been conflicted on the fact that the Game Boy Advance focused so much on remakes from the Super Nintendo era. I mean, it's something where it's like, that is still, that is so cool. That is so cool. You're able to get Super Nintendo games on the go. But in the end, you know, when I look back at the Game Boy Advance, I love that handheld, but I'm still kind of like, it doesn't have as much of like its own vibe as something like the DS, you know? A bunch of Midway titles, a Cruisin' Velocity. I guess the Cruisin' series has always kind of been like a joint venture between Midway and Nintendo. Like, yeah, the Cruisin' series is owned by Nintendo, but they just don't care about it. At least that's how I see it. Where it's like Cruisin' Blast came out on the Nintendo Switch, but like Midway's no more. Midway pretty much dissolved into WB Games, and they don't really have much to do with Cruisin'. So I believe like Raw Thrills did Cruisin' Blast, and you know, they worked with Nintendo's license, like Nintendo licensed the game to them. I'm just kind of like, why do they, why does Nintendo own this franchise at that point? Midway's greatest hits, Defender, Sinistar, Robotron, and Joust. Not a horrible lineup there. Midway doesn't have like the worst arcade games. They're actually pretty okay, mainly because I played the Midway arcade compilation on Xbox 360 recently. And yeah, I like a fair amount of the Midway games. I just don't care about them that much. But I will say, even though I don't care about Rampage, this is a goddamn disgrace. Rampage Puzzle Attack? I've never heard of this. A lot of Game Boy Advance games, like there is so many that came out. Like some of these, I never knew existed. It's a Rampage puzzle game. What? Isn't it strange how much like Rampage has kind of been like positioned as this big IP? Well, like, I've never known of it as that. Like, it's always kind of been there. There's, like, a Rampage game on the Wii. You have this shit. And then you have the Rampage movie that did fairly well. And then like an arcade game based on the movie, which you can find at like Dave and Buster's and whatnot. But I don't think that movie did well at all because it was based on Rampage the video game. I don't think anybody that went to go see it recognized it as, oh, like the video game. I think everybody saw it because it was a stupid blockbuster summer movie that they could just go and turn off their brain and watch The Rock for like 2 hours with a giant monkey. Advanced knowledge, strategy, tips, codes, and trick. That's all this is. It's just strategy guides. What are you talking about? So same stuff. I mean, like there's not much they can really do from issue to issue, which is why I'm sure this thing did not last past like 2001, because you can already see like a total like, yeah, this is just the same, like you're just going over the same games over and over again. And like how much can you really say about like Donald Duck Advance, man? Donald explodes on Game Boy Advance. Whoa there! Disney's Donald Duck Advance, I believe, is like an adaptation of Goin' Quackers, which was on like every platform known to man. You have Midway's greatest arcade hits, and then, you know, once again, Spyro's Season of Ice. Tom and Jerry the Magic Ring. I had that movie on VHS. That was like a direct to VHS movie. It was only like an hour long, and I don't remember much of it, but I did have it. And I believe it was also on Netflix a couple years ago, so I did check in with it again. I was like, I remember this movie, and I watched like 5 minutes of it, and I don't remember anything of it anymore. But isn't it wild how like they would make video games based on direct-to-video movies back then? You had Scooby-Doo the Cyber Chase on PS1, you have like Lion King 1.5 on Game Boy Advance. It's wild that they were willing to fund like video games based on direct-to-DVD or video movies. It's wild to me. Here we have Column's Crown, published by THQ. I didn't know of the Columns game on Game Boy Advance, but this was when like I think Sega and THQ had a bit of a partnership in this era, probably because like Sega just was at like their lowest point, man. I mean, this was after the Dreamcast failed. This was pretty much when they were like, yep, we're going third party. And I assume they might have needed some help, or it was just lower risk for them to just have THQ publish these games for them. But yeah, pretty much all the Sonic Advance games on Game Boy Advance in North America, published by THQ. It's strange. Oh, we have Super Sponge on Game Boy Advance. I always wanted this mainly because it was very, very similar to the PS1 game, which I had. You know, they're pretty much the same game, but this is like a bit of an abridged version of it. But I just liked it because it was like most games that I would get on Game Boy Advance that I had on GameCube. I kind of wanted the Game Boy Advance version to be the same thing as the GameCube one. This one was pretty much the same thing as the PS1 one, so I really wanted that, but I didn't have it. I saw people play it on the bus, though. I saw people play it on the bus, and I was so damn upset I did not have the game myself. I was not so damn upset I didn't have Rampage Puzzle Attack, though. Midnight Club Street Racing. Is that the Rockstar series? Is that Midnight Club from Rockstar? Because it's only published by Destination Software, but I don't know, maybe they license that to them. That's pretty interesting. Here we have a solid little fishing game on Game Boy Advance. Pretty cool. Oh, wow, interesting. So, Nintendo Power advertising a PlayStation 2 game. I forget how common that was back in this era of Nintendo Power. Because I believe in this era, Nintendo themselves were still publishing Nintendo Power. Eventually, they handed off the responsibility to like the magazine company Future Press. But yeah, that's pretty wild. But yeah, this is talking about like Frogger the Great Quest on PS2, which is horrible. But then I'm talking about Frogger's Adventures Temple of the Frog on Game Boy Advance. Like these were supposed to be kind of like companion titles. But Temple of the Frog is a completely different game, though it does have this disgusting f***ing design of Frogger on it. But it's weird because Frogger, the Great Quest from PS2, did get a GBA adaptation later down the line, which, you know, had more to do with the Great Quest than Temple of the Frog. But Temple of the Frog is kind of going like, yo, Frogger's back, and he's on Game Boy Advance as well, whoa! But here we have, you know, the upcoming Game Boy Advance titles. Pretty much the same stuff. as usual. Here they changed the name of Sonic the Hedgehog to Sonic the Hedgehog Advance, so things are moving along. Shrek Kart. Did that ever come out on Game Boy Advance? I mean, you have like that Shrek Smash and Crash Racing, but that came out like years later. That was like end of GameCube lifespan, and I'm not sure if that had a Game Boy Advance version, but if it did, you know, it came out in like 2005 or something. Oh my god, look, upcoming Game Boy Advance, Grand Theft Auto 3. Not really Grand Theft Auto Advance released, but that coincided with San Andreas in 2004. So yeah, this is pretty messed up, man. Look at all this stuff. This is wild. Yeah, wow. Yeah, wow. We have Banjo-Kazooie Grunty's Revenge, which did release, but this was still during the time where Rare was, you know, under Nintendo's wing. And then we have Donkey Kong Coconut Crackers, Diddy Kong Pilot, all got changed to non-Kong related things after Microsoft purchased Rare. Tetris is back. Wow. Well, gang, that was Nintendo Power Advance, at least for the most part. There is an issue or two that I'm missing here. But you know, I think we get the gist of this mini series of magazines, mainly because, you know, this era of Nintendo Power is really cool to look back on, but if you're not really interested in strategy guides, it's not really for you. And I kind of like these more so for like the upcoming games sections. I like seeing the ads. I like seeing like what was new at the time. And these for sure told you what was new at the time over and over and over again. I think it was kind of hard for them to keep up with a magazine completely dedicated to just Game Boy Advance every single quarter. But they sure did do it. And this is a very interesting, very cool, little obscure subset of Nintendo Power history. So I really don't regret taking a look at these. I do regret spending $400 on all of them though.